Welcome back to the Dark Reading News Desk here at Black Hat USA in Las Vegas. Terry Sweeney here with Dark Reading. Joining us now is Benny Charney, founder and CEO of OPSWAT. Benny, thanks so much for doing the Dark Reading News Desk today.
Terry, thank you for having me.
Let's start with just some context, and I'm curious what your view of the current threat landscape is. What sorts of things have caught your attention in the last year? How do you see them shaping the future with regard to not just cybersecurity, but also critical infrastructure industries?
So the past year, cybersecurity remained very exciting.
Sure, maybe too exciting, right?
Yes. So you still see breaches. I mean, what we do, we protect critical infrastructure. We protect the world critical infrastructure. So, and every time I'm looking at that, I'm astonished to see that despite it's critical, despite there is so much investment in critical infrastructure, there are still breaches.
It's kind of shocking given the attention, the expenditure, the sophistication of the tools, and yet there's always another level of escalation, right?
Yeah, well, on the positive note, whatever I see that there is much more specific regulation that is coming our way to go and protect critical infrastructure. The latest presidential order is specific instructions. There are much more regulations coming in the energy sector coming our way. So I see that trend as very positive.
Well, so you bring up a good point. I mean, protecting critical infrastructure has become a high-profile issue, high-profile enough for the politicians to get involved, which, again, is a mixed blessing. But talk about the role of threat intelligence in helping those who are managing and running critical infrastructure. How is it helping them identify and respond to potential cyber threats?
So whenever you consume the threat intelligence, number one, you map your network, you're consuming more and more threats, then your attack surface, you pretty much you understand your attack, you understand what you need to prioritize or what you need to do whenever you get it. However, it's not only about the threat intel, it's about how well you connect it to your platform.
Okay.
So for example, you could have the threat intel, though if you don't know how the threats can actually create threats, a real threat to your organization, it's just reading a newspaper.
Sure, but threat intel is not new to the critical infrastructure industries. What's changed? More attention to it? Something else?
I see that I think the biggest change to threat intel is that the sensitivity of the threats to the existing cyber defense. For example, antivirus, it's doing a decent job protecting a device, however, doing a terrible job scanning a file. So whenever you see a threat, you take that into consideration to prioritize what's the potential damage to your organization.
Okay. In light of this increasing sophistication of the threats that we're talking about, talk about the steps that you think organizations should at least consider, if not enact, to improve their own incident response capabilities.
So number one, I would ask yourself is why should you ever have an incident? So the number one recommendation I would have to anyone, to any organization, is to deploy deep CDR technology. CDR means that you assume that all of the files that are flowing into your organizations are bad. So you're regenerating those. The technology we've been building for years, and I'm seeing a huge adoption of that technology these days. And I'm extremely proud of that, which means that we can, the more adoption of that, we are decreasing the potential way or the potential points to go to get an attacker, to penetrate a critical infrastructure, and not even critical infrastructure, I would say any organization.
And are you seeing this wider adoption of CDR among the critical infrastructure industries?
Definitely. CDR is what would be one thing I would highly first I see that the adoption, and I see the adoption works, and I see that customers that are adopting CDR are way less prone for cyber attacks. The second recommendation is the adoption of unidirectional gateways. It's optical firewalls. So as you know, a firewall has been around for many years. So it has many issues. Sure. Number one, it's very complicated, lots of rules, so you have mistakes coming up with the rules. Number two, vulnerabilities. You see that a firewall, sometimes it's easier to hack organization if they have a firewall because of a zero-day on the firewall. So for that, the adoption of optical firewalls, like we call it data diodes or unidirectional gateways, it's physically proven the data cannot move from one way to another, so you can trust that much more than the traditional firewalls.
Okay. we can't talk about critical infrastructure without also talking about the software supply chains and their vulnerability. They've obviously become a huge target of attack for bad actors. How can organizations ensure both security and integrity of their software? Can they effectively, if not protect themselves, insulate themselves from that cascade effect that we've seen with so many software supply chain attacks?
But yeah, I walk here around the booth here in Beckett, everybody screams, supply chain, supply chain. What do you really do in supply chain? So I can go and list that. I can talk the whole day. I can do 30 minutes now on supply chain. However, number one, you want to know where stuff is being manufactured. You want to know it's not being manufactured in a forbidden country.
Okay.
And there are many of those. So, and then this is one thing. Number two, you want to make sure there's no malware coming to your organization through the supply chain. And for that, you know that antiviruses are not effective scanning files. So you have to take a multi-scanning approach, scanning any content, any file, anything coming from with any organization using many. If you deal with software, you need to go and make sure there's no vulnerabilities associated with the specific components, or not only the code base whenever you bring things in. If it's software, you also want to go and do static analysis, and in multiple ways. You want to put the SBOM, you want to check multiple things on those. So, I see the regulators are very much doing a decent job making, however, I would like to see much more, for them to be much more specific about that. Exactly like how I listed it, or even getting even further to the details about how supply chains supposed to be done in different critical infrastructure.
Supply chain protection, from what you're saying, it's pretty clear it needs a different model. Like what's in place isn't really up to the task.
It's not there from the definition perspective, and also the market, I think there's a lot of things to go and do before we do it well. So I can see the next 5 years, the next 10 years, much more regulation, also much more platform. So the industry needs a platform for supply chain, not just to go, let's say, buzzword on a data sheet, hey, we do supply chain. So again, getting to the multi-scanning, getting to the country of origin, scanning the code, if their device, kind of figure out all of the components of the device and really scan them in a thorough way to make sure that, again, nothing malicious is penetrating the organization. Network mapping for everything also needs to be connected to that and connected to this whole vision of the supply chain. And supply chain, you want to see, is that hardware, is that software? What are the supply chain? And all of those needs to be applied to the components you bring to your organization.
Okay, that's well stated. Thank you. Let's turn to what OPSWAT brings to the table with regard to safeguarding critical infrastructure. What sort of innovations are you bringing to the table that improve the picture, really beef up the equation here?
Terry, my whole adult life, 20 years, I'm building a platform to protect the world critical infrastructure. The platform includes areas in the IT, in the OT. We do the whole data transfer from the IT to the OT. It's more than 20 products, more than 16 specific technologies like the CDR I mentioned, all about the critical infrastructure, addressing supply chain protection, cross-domain, big challenges of critical infrastructure protection. And on top of everything, we put the training academy, the OPSWAT Academy, to actually train the growing IT and security workforce in critical infrastructure and other organizations.
Okay. We have to talk about the human element in this equation. It remains just probably the largest single vulnerability in any network, in any organization. What does OPSWAT do to raise awareness and also train employees about the latest threats and best practices?
Terry, do you know how many cybersecurity certifications are out there? Like CISSP and so on? Guess, give me a number.
Yeah.
423.
Wow, okay.
So there's only one that focus and train a workforce on protecting the world critical infrastructure or protecting critical infrastructure, and training the team members and training the the IT folks, cybersecurity folks in critical infrastructure. What is really critical infrastructure protection? What is SCADA? What is supply chain? How to do supply chain well? What is CDR? How well antivirus? What is a sandbox in the context of CDR? How to configure a PLC correctly? How to connect the HMI, how to protect an HMI from specific situation in critical infrastructure, and specific critical infrastructure protection compliance mandates, and how to get ready for those.
does the way we think about training need to change? I mean, the need for training is a regular mantra among security vendors. Is it making the difference that it needs to?
Number one, training has to be fun, has to be engaging,
Okay.
has to be a one that people wants to do and we're not forcing them to do. So, so the engagement, the platform, the technology platform, you go and invest that on the communities around that. Also needs to be affordable to a point that is accessible to many, and in many cases free.
Yeah, great stuff, Benny. Thank you for dropping by the Dark Reading News Desk today. Really appreciate your comments and perspective.
Thank you, Terry, for having me.
It's a pleasure. We've been talking with Benny Czarny, founder and CEO of OPSWAT. This has been Terry Sweeney for Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us for this segment.